Tonight I chose 5 albums with Yes, and there's a reason why I chose 5. You see, I'm taking into consideration the various incarnations of Yes, and so I feel I have to choose at least 5 albums to even do the band justice. And of course, the 5 albums that I'm going to introduce tonight better represent 2 separate incarnations, basically, of Yes. Okay, so in the number 5 spot is Big Generator. Now, first of all, I do want to explain I chose Big Generator begrudgingly. I almost want to choose Tales of the Topographic Ocean for this one, but I'm going to go ahead with Big Generator being number 5. Still an amazing album by this band. Here we see the band working very closely with the guitarist Trevor Rabin. Now, the reason I'm laughing about that, I'm not even sure that's how you pronounce his name. Maybe it's Rabin? I don't know. Rabin? But Trevor, once he's in the band, he really brings something to the band. First of all, he's a great guitarist. Second of all, he's a good vocalist. And third of all, he's a writer. As a matter of fact, you'll find his name on a lot of soundtracks to a lot of movies. Good soundtracks for the most part. Now, the person on this album I'm the most impressed with is John Anderson. I mean, within the confinements of the band, he's the vocalist. And to bring on somebody else to share in lead vocals occasionally just speaks of how secure this man really is. And at this juncture in the band's development, it all works in the band's favor. Here we see a more updated sound with Yes, a more pop-oriented sound with Yes. I know at the time I spoke to a couple of Yes fans and they weren't happy with this move at all. And I know there are fans of Yes that just prefer their classic lineup, just like me. And of course, that classic lineup we'll get to in just a moment. But I gotta tell you, generally speaking, I was very impressed with this album. You know, it was the band's incarnation on this album and yet another album we'll discuss that I actually got to see live. And membership in this incarnation of the band only included 2 of the 5 original members that I was introduced to. Oh, but the 2 members. First of all, we've already talked about John Anderson and his wisdom in stepping back just a bit for the better of the band. You know, I always see John Anderson as the head of the band. Not in the sense that he was the leader, but that he had this vision that the rest of the band seemed to agree with, and when they had that kind of direction, they were always at their very best. And of course, the second member I'm talking about is my 3rd favorite bassist of all time, Chris Squire. You know, I say 3rd favorite bassist. That's because I have this list in my head that says, well, this guy gets it here for that, and this guy gets it here for that, and we'll just put Chris over here. I tell you, while I'm listening to Chris, he is my favorite bassist of all time, every single time. And you know, I've heard people say, oh, he's nothing but a frustrated lead guitarist bassist. A, they don't know what they're talking about. B, they don't know what they're talking about, and you can guess C. Oh, but he does play fast, and he plays riffs you don't think you could do on a bass. I ought to know, I am a bassist. That's what I did for the last 10 years, playing live in a rock band. No. Chris Squire is a virtuoso. But you know, it's not just that he's a great bassist. You know, if John Anderson is the head of the band, Chris Squire is the soul. Up until when he died, he was on every single incarnation of Yes. He was always there. Even when John Anderson would leave for a sliver of time, Chris Squire was in the band. And you know, his presence is everywhere on this album, just like it is on the next album I'm going to feature, 90125. Now, I haven't looked at the sales numbers, but I would imagine that if I did, this has got to be Yes's biggest seller. I know that Owner of a Lonely Heart sold real well, and it also introduced a ton of people who had never even heard of this band. But out of these 2 albums, 90125 is a far superior album, and the best album this incarnation ever even considered to put together. And they put a lot of effort into these recordings. Even the track order on this album, you can tell it was put together very, very carefully. Now, when I discovered Yes, I lived in a small town Waynesville, North Carolina, as I've mentioned before. So when I went to buy this record at the drugstore, which was the only store in town that I was aware of that actually sold records, they didn't have this next album. As a matter of fact, the other two albums I'm about to mention, I already had by the time I got access to my number 3 pick tonight, and that, of course, is the Yes album. Now, I found out they had a couple of previous albums, but the only one available to me at the time was the Yes album, and I had heard that their sound wasn't quite the same as it was on Fragile. So I gotta tell you, I didn't hold out much hope for this album. You know, either I misheard them or they were talking about other pre-releases at the time. Because I gotta tell you, this album sounds really close to the style they achieve on Fragile, with songs such as Yours Is No Disgrace, Starship Troopers. My God, the album is fantastic. When I saw the title Starship Troopers on the album, I had already read Heinlein's Starship Troopers. I'm not sure that's what they were going for, but that's what I heard in my head. Songs talking about people moving in chess moves? Oh my goodness. What a different sound they had. Okay, so we're at the number 2 spot here, and my choice for number 2 is Fragile, the very first album I ever heard from Yes. You know, just like 90125, this album even came with a top 10 radio hit. I loved Roundabout, and there are other major pieces on this album, but what really glues this album together is each member of the band gets a track that shows you either their prowess on their instrument or as a composer. And these, of course, are interspersed throughout the album. It becomes a treat to wait for the next Yes member to show off their stuff. The imagery supplied by Roger Dean on the cover is magnificent, and if you haven't heard this album, it's really a really easy listen. All right, so that gets us to the number 1 spot, and of course my number 1 choice is Close to the Edge. Now, when I actually bought this album, I had moved back to California, and when I heard this album, I couldn't believe it. First of all, side 1. It's all one piece. It's all one song. A song that they take their time developing. A song that really shows you the compositional skills of this band. And side 2's no worse for the wear. It only has 2 songs, and Siberian Country's my favorite Yes track of all time. Now, this is one of those albums that I would suggest that you isolate yourself and give yourself 45 minutes to listen to. Close the drapes, put on a pair of headphones, turn down the lights, and I always put on some incense, and just be prepared to let the music absorb you. Okay, so we're going to talk more about Yes. We're going to get into the different incarnations. We're going to talk about various band members, and I'm really excited to get those videos in the can as soon as possible. You know, as far as I'm concerned, Yes earns their spot on Mount Olympus by bringing to the table something we hadn't quite heard before, an approach to rock music that hadn't really been looked at, with maybe the minor exception of the Moody Blues before them. But even the Moody Blues never got to this level as a 5-piece performing band.